Hi, I'm Jessie Myers. I did George Brown's scheduling for almost 7 years, from 1980. One of my favorite evenings with George was when he won election after running for the second time against a young man named John Paul Stark. Very nice young man, very presentable in the way he looked and the way he sounded. The first time he ran against George, we would take him to a debate, and he would put his arm around John Paul Stark and say to the audience, "You must get to know this young man. He is a fine young man." He was with the Campus Crusade for Christ. So after about 3 times like that, the staff said, "You know, George, you don't need to badmouth your opponent. We know you wouldn't do that, but would you not promote him? After all, this is an election." George won that election. But the next 2 years later, John Paul Stark ran against him again, and the first thing that happened was a mailer was sent out by the Republican National Committee, I believe, that accused George Brown of being a baby killer. I believe it was about stem cell research. And it infuriated George so that he said, "I'm going to bury him." And he did. So we got to the campaign celebration. At the end of the campaign, the victory celebration. It was a big hotel over in San Bernardino. And someone from CBS News came and put a camera on George and a microphone in front of him and said, "Well, Congressman Brown, since John Paul Stark was with Campus Crusade for Christ, was a Christian, you have a lot of Christians in your district, to what do you attribute your win?" And George thought a minute and he said, "You know, there must be a lot of sinners in my district."
I'm Barbara Kerr. I'm a retired teacher and retired teacher advocate union goon. I remember when I was president of the Riverside City Teachers Association, we went to a Chamber of Commerce luncheon, and George was there. He was running for, I don't know which term, but he was talking to the Chamber of Commerce. And his opponent got up there and talked about being a Reagan this and a this and this, because it was during the time Reagan was president. George got up there looking just like George always did, and he said, "Chamber of Commerce, you knew me. You know I'm good for Riverside. You know I'm good for business. You also know I don't support probably one thing that Ronald Reagan has done, but I support Riverside, so vote for me." And guess what? They all stood up and applauded, and they voted for him.
My name is Mark Takano. I was born and raised here in the city of Riverside. I was a teacher for 23 years. And I sat on the Riverside Community College Board of Trustees for 22 years. And for the early part of my life, from the time I was, every time I could remember until I was a teenager, actually my late 20s, George Brown was a member of Congress in my area. He represented Riverside for a while, and then redistricting took him outside of Riverside, but he was not far away. I'm now a member of Congress. I'm proud to say that George Brown has had a great impact on me. I always remember George winning his elections by the slimmest of margins because he never compromised his progressive liberal conscience. And that taught me a huge lesson, that you can be who you are and stand up for what you believe. And ultimately, the people will support you. So I stand up in the chamber, in the House chamber, now that I'm a member of Congress. And whenever there's a hard vote, I always remember the channel, the spirit of George Brown. And I say, if George can do it, so can I.
I wanted to share some stories about George Brown and his support for Latinos and the Latino community. Before George represented Riverside, he represented Monterey Park and the areas surrounding Monterey Park, which included East Los Angeles. And in that time, this was the 60s, every time the Latinos wanted to organize or to make something happen in the community, George usually was behind the scenes, either lending support or finding a way to help.
Hi, my name is Marisa Yeager, and I was an intern for George Brown Jr., Congress member, June of 1995 through August of 1995. I was a full-time intern right out of college, and I went to Washington, D.C. That was my first experience working for a member. Worked on the North American Free Trade Agreement and the analysis of what was to become future trade agreements for other countries. I also helped with the intake of scheduling appointments, incoming phone calls, making sure he was aware when to make sure to turn off his cigar. He was very much a cigar smoker, and we all knew when Marta was coming in because the cigar smoke would no longer be around. So he was a very pleasant member. I will always remember his bipartisanship, his humbleness, and his ability to share with everyone that you need to do the right thing, regardless of all the public policy decisions before you. Do the right thing for the community, and especially those who you represent.
Hi, my name's Tony Mize, and I was mentioning to Marta earlier that I had some of my earliest memories of George were back in 1970 when my father ran for state senate in Orange County. I think that's about the time he met George and knew him from his earlier congressional district and then his district here in the Inland Empire. But I can remember a specific Saturday, I believe it was, that was a strawberry festival in Garden Grove parade. And my dad and George and Congressman Dick Hanna were sitting in a Cadillac convertible, all sitting up on the back with the top down, waving to the crowd as they went down the parade route in the Strawberry Festival Parade, 1970.
Some of my best memories, though, were visiting his office back in Washington, D.C. when I was on the NEA board, and I'd have to go lobby him because it was the easiest lobbying job in the whole world. He was always welcoming and always was on top of education issues and was a real advocate for our public schools. And I really miss George. We need people of his character and intellect in Congress today.
I'm here to give you the other side of George Brown. He was a pain in the ass. he was one of those saints, who keep, give, and he never gave back to me. I never profited one single tip from George Brown. He never did a favor for me, but that's why he was so great. He did a favor for everybody. He was the die cast for liberals in any generation, in any year, in any century. He was an honest man. He gave and goaded and goaded me, even though I didn't live in his goddamn district, to give money, even when I didn't have money. I gave here today for money, and I still resent George Brown.
He was a wonderful, compassionate, nonpartisan man who cared about the people in his district. So I made a real effort to see that we took him to all different groups. So people really got to know him and he got to know them. And I booked him into the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And when the Washington, D.C. Chief of Staff saw that, he called me and said, "Do we really want him to go there? These people would never vote for him." And I said, "Well, we don't just book him for people that would vote for him, and also it gives him a chance to get acquainted with them and them with him." So George decided himself that that's where he would like to go. And I drove him that day. It was a beautiful day. We went in, had a rather lukewarm reception. A lot of people at the Canyon Crest Country Club, all men and all older men. And George went to the podium, spoke for about 20 minutes, talked about what he knew very well, Veterans Affairs. He was on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and he cared a lot about veterans. And he spoke with great knowledge, and they were very impressed, and they asked a lot of questions. And when we left, we could still hear them in their standing ovation applauding him. They loved him, and it was a very successful meeting.